Flames rolled through the clouds as 1,000 engines thundered eastward, carrying men who already knew their odds of survival. Britain's bombers were not losing because they lacked courage. They were losing because of time. In the seconds it took to reload, German fighters turned the sky into a graveyard. At 20,000 feet, the air was thin and cruel. Inside the Halifax bombers, the crew worked like parts of a living machine: pilot, navigator, bombardier, engineer, and the one man who sat utterly alone at the rear, the tail gunner. His world was no bigger than a metal cage. A glass dome barely wide enough to turn his shoulders. Outside, death came at 300 miles per hour, glowing with cannon fire. Every gunner knew the math. Their twin Browning guns spat 1,200 rounds a minute. 250 bullets gone in seconds. Then came the reload. 10 seconds of silence. 10 seconds when no one could help you. 10 seconds when a German pilot could lock on, fire, and end your story. The mission today was the Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heart. It was also its deadliest air zone. Flak batteries lined the rivers. Fighter squadrons swarmed like hornets. The crews of Bomber Command called it the Black Wall. No one wanted to fly through it twice. But orders were orders. At RAF Lakenheath, just before dawn, crews gathered under the dim lights of the operations room. The air smelled of fuel and fear. A red line on the map traced their route across the North Sea into enemy territory. The commanding officer's voice was steady, almost detached. Primary target: Essen Steel Works. Heavy fighter resistance expected. Godspeed, gentlemen. Among the rows of tired faces stood a young gunner, tightening the straps on his flight suit. Sergeant Arthur Weller, 24. From Manchester. A quiet man, the kind who spoke only when necessary. No one knew much about him, except that he had a strange way of reloading his guns. A way so fast and awkward that others called it ridiculous. In the mess hall, the night before, a few gunners had joked about it. "They say he never stops firing," one said.
"Yeah?
"Maybe he'll burn the barrels off next," another replied. Weller didn't respond. He just kept checking the feed belts, his hands moving with a mechanic's precision. He wasn't trying to prove anyone wrong. He just wanted to survive. As the engines roared to life, Night Reaper lifted from the runway, its black body vanishing into the clouds. Weller settled into his turret, sealing himself inside his glass bubble. The world outside turned white, then gray, then endless black. Hours later, they crossed the Dutch coast. German radar caught them immediately. Within minutes, the Luftwaffe scrambled. Sirens wailed across airfields. Pilots strapped in, engines screamed, and the hunters rose. Inside the bomber formation, tension tightened like wire. The radio crackled with nervous chatter. Flak ahead, fighters climbing fast. Someone coughed to mask his fear. Weller checked his guns again. Belts loaded, spares ready. He flexed his fingers in his gloves. The cold bit through the leather. Through his intercom, the pilot's voice came, steady but low. "Stay sharp, boys. They'll come out of the sun." Then, silence. The kind of silence that felt like the sky holding its breath. The first explosion broke it apart. A bomber to their left erupted in flame, spinning downward. The crew of Night Reaper flinched as debris flashed past their wing. The intercom filled with shouting. "Bandits! 6 o'clock high!" Weller swung his turret around. His heart hammered, but his hands were steady. Out of the clouds came the first fighter, a Focke-Wulf 190, diving straight at them, guns blazing. Tracers whipped past his canopy. He squeezed the triggers. The Brownings roared to life, spitting orange fire into the wind. The vibration rattled his bones. He could barely hear his own breathing. The fighter veered off, trailing smoke. Weller didn't cheer. He just reloaded. One belt gone. Another ready. 10 seconds. He slid the new belt in, the movement so practiced it looked like instinct. The guns clattered again. Another fighter appeared, closer this time. Weller's voice came through the intercom, calm and clipped. "Rear turret engaging." The pilot answered. "Keep them off us, Art." For 30 seconds, the sky was nothing but metal, smoke, and light. Weller's guns never stopped. His hands worked faster than thought, firing, feeding, firing again. But there were too many of them. 4, maybe 5 fighters circling, attacking from different angles. Each pass brought a spray of cannon shells that tore holes through the fuselage. Oxygen hissed from ruptured lines. The bomber shook like it might split in two. The mid-gunner screamed, "They are all over us." Weller didn't answer. He couldn't. A fresh belt jammed halfway into the feed. The guns clicked uselessly. The sound, that small, hollow click, was pure terror. He ripped off his glove, grabbed the belt bare-handed, forced it through, and fired again. The barrels glowed red. The smell of burning oil filled the turret. Outside, a fighter burst into flames and spiraled down. Then another. The intercom crackled with disbelief. "Tail gunner, how the hell are you still firing?" Weller ignored it. His world had shrunk to motion and timing. Fire. Feed. Fire. Feed. Each belt change was a dance between life and death, and somehow, he was keeping the rhythm. Minutes passed like hours. The formation pushed deeper into Germany. The air behind Night Reaper shimmered with smoke and falling wrecks. By the time the last fighter broke away, Weller's arms were trembling. His guns hissed with heat. He exhaled for the first time in what felt like forever. The pilot's voice came through, low and awed. "Tail, report." "Still here," Weller replied. His tone was flat, exhausted. "Good shooting. We're still flying because of you." He didn't answer. He just stared into the fading smoke. The rest of the mission passed in silence. The target was bombed. The bombers turned for home. Over the North Sea, the crew finally began to breathe again. But no one spoke about what had happened. When Night Reaper landed at Lakenheath that evening, the ground crew counted more than 200 bullet holes in the fuselage. The tail turret looked scorched, almost melted. Weller stepped out, his gloves burned through at the palms. The squadron debriefing was quiet. The commander asked how he'd kept his guns firing without pause. Weller shrugged. "Didn't think about it, sir. Just kept loading." That night, as others slept, he sat alone beside the bomber, staring at the dark horizon. The air was calm now. Peaceful. But he knew it wouldn't last. Tomorrow, they'd go up again. And the sky would burn once more. But what no one yet knew was that this young gunner, with his strange, ridiculous reload, had just rewritten the rules of aerial combat. The airfield at Lakenheath was wrapped in fog. The kind that swallowed sound, hiding even the roar of engines. Yet through the grey stillness came the faint rhythm of boots on tarmac, hundreds of them, moving toward their bombers. Each man carried the same expression: exhaustion buried beneath duty. 4 days had passed since the disastrous raid on Essen. Of the 90 bombers that had left, 20 never returned. The survivors looked haunted. Each empty bunk in the barracks was a reminder of the price paid above the clouds. Sergeant Arthur Weller had barely slept. The image of the sky tearing apart, of burning planes falling through the clouds, still played behind his eyes every time he closed them. Yet he didn't speak of it to anyone. He simply cleaned his guns, checked his belts, and waited for the next mission order. That morning, as he sat alone near the hangar, his crewmate Flight Engineer Tom Brick Bailey walked up, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You ever stop moving, Art?" Bailey said, handing him one. Weller took it without looking up. "If I stop, I think. If I think, I see it again." Bailey nodded. He understood. They all did. Moments later, the operations bell rang, a sharp, metallic sound that cut through the fog like a blade. The men froze. Another mission. Another night into hell. Inside the briefing room, The red line on the map stretched deeper into Germany this time, Dortmund. The heart of the German war factories. Flak concentration. Extreme. Fighter presence. Confirmed heavy. The commanding officer paused before speaking. Gentlemen, the enemy believes we're broken. Tonight, we prove them wrong. The room was silent. No cheers. No bravado. Just quiet acceptance. By dusk, the Halifax bombers lined the runway like black ghosts. Crews climbed aboard, tightening straps, checking oxygen. Weller climbed into his turret, the same cramped metal coffin he called home. He brushed a gloved hand over the cooling barrels, scorched from the last battle, but still functional. Night Reaper ready for takeoff, came the pilot's voice. Engines thundered, and the bomber rolled forward into the deepening dark. The ground fell away, replaced by an ocean of clouds glowing silver under the moonlight. As they climbed, the intercom carried fragments of chatter, small talk forced through fear. Bailey humming an old song. The navigator swearing at his map. Even the pilot trying to sound calm. Then came Weller's voice, soft but steady. Tail clear. Nothing behind us yet. Hours passed. The formation crossed into German airspace. The night was deceptively quiet, the kind of silence that promised disaster. Then, sudden flashes on the horizon. Flak! 11 o'clock. The sky erupted. Black bursts of smoke blossomed around them, shaking the bomber with every shockwave. Metal fragments tore through the air. Weller's turret rattled violently. Shards of flak punched holes into the fuselage, slicing through the radio wires. Comms are patchy. Bailey shouted. Weller tried to focus through the chaos. His hands moved automatically, checking the guns, the feeds, the ammunition boxes. He could hear his own heartbeat louder than the engines. Then, through the smoke, he saw them, dots growing larger, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Fighters. At least 6. Approaching fast. They are here, he said quietly. The pilot's voice came back, strained. Call them, Art. 6 bandits, high and closing. Rear attack pattern. The formation braced. Within seconds, the first Focke-Wulf dove straight into their tail line. Tracers lit up the darkness. Weller swung his turret, squeezed the triggers, and unleashed a storm of fire. The first fighter peeled off, its wings sheared open. But more came. 3 at once, from above and below. Cannon shells slammed into the bomber's belly. The oxygen line burst. The mid-gunner screamed. Mid's hit. His hit bad. Weller barely heard. His world was nothing but smoke and motion. His fingers worked in a blur, feeding fresh belts, firing, ejecting, reloading. The rhythm was unnatural, almost machine-like. One belt jammed. He didn't curse, didn't panic. He reached for his knife, sliced the feed straight through, and forced the next one in. The guns clattered back to life. The fighters circled again. This time, 2 of them coordinated. One drawing his fire, the other diving low toward the bomber's belly. Weller saw it too late. The explosion tore through the fuselage. Fire spread instantly. Smoke poured through the compartments. Bail out! We're burning! The pilot shouted. But the bomber didn't break apart. Not yet. Weller could feel the tail section twisting under him. The intercom crackled again. Tail, can you get out? No, he said simply. Turret jammed. Go! He could hear the hatches opening, the shouts, the rush of wind as his crew jumped one by one. The pilot's voice came last, trembling now. Art, you've done your job. Get out. Weller looked around the turret. The escape hatch behind him was twisted metal. There was no way. He knew it. But he didn't stop firing. The fighters were still circling, unaware that most of the crew had bailed. He locked onto one, a Messerschmitt 109 diving head-on, and opened fire. Every round he had left. The tracer line connected perfectly. The German fighter erupted in flame. Another closed in, guns flashing. Weller reloaded one final time. His vision blurred from the smoke, the heat, the lack of oxygen. He fired blind. The fighter exploded at less than 50 yards, the shockwave throwing the tail turret sideways. Metal screamed, bolts ripped free, and the bomber began to spiral. For a moment, the world turned upside down. The stars spun. The horizon vanished. Then, silence. The Night Reaper went down over a frozen field outside Munster. Hours later, German soldiers combed the wreckage. They found twisted aluminum, burnt cloth, and the shattered remains of a turret. Inside, still strapped to his seat, Arthur Weller sat motionless. His hands were blackened, still clutching the gun grips. The barrels were melted together. The officer who discovered him paused, staring in disbelief. Mein Gott, he fought until the end. They buried him beside the wreck that morning. No name, just a cross marked Unbekannter Schütze, unknown gunner. Back in England, days later, the surviving crew of Night Reaper made it home through enemy lines. Their report stunned command. They told how Weller had held off 6 fighters alone, allowing them to escape. How he'd kept firing even as the plane burned. At RAF Lakenheath, a small wooden plaque appeared in the mess hall. It read, "He never stopped firing." The story spread quietly at first, from one squadron to another, from gunners to ground crews. Soon every tail gunner in Bomber Command knew his name. They started calling his reload technique the Weller Twist. A move that no one had taught him. A move born out of survival, and perfected through fire. And though Arthur Weller would never know it, his strange, relentless way of fighting would soon change the way every gunner trained from that day forward. 3 weeks after the fall of the Night Reaper, the English spring arrived late. The skies over Lakenheath were grey again, the air cold enough to sting. Yet inside one of the hangars, men gathered in silence around a battered turret hauled from a wreck, twisted, scorched, but still intact. On its side, scrawled in chalk, were the words, "Weller's gun." The story had spread through every corner of Bomber Command. A gunner who refused to stop firing, who'd melted his barrels and bought his crew their lives. To most, it sounded like legend, something too dramatic to be real. But the melted metal told a different story. Flight Officer Harris leaned close to the remains. He wasn't looking for ghosts. He was looking for answers. "He fired through the jam," he murmured. "No stoppage, no pause. Not even when it overheated. How in God's name?" Beside him stood another man. Thin, pale, his uniform marked with the insignia of the Royal Air Force Gunnery School. Sergeant Instructor Colin Reeves. Once a gunner himself, now he trained others to survive the skies. Reeves tapped the gun cradle, noticing the rough cut where the belt feed had been sliced clean. "He used the knife," Reeves said. "Cut the jam, refed the belt while spinning. That's suicide, and genius." For a moment, Harris said nothing. Then quietly, "Do you think it can be taught?" Reeves looked up. "It has to be." That night, under the dim lights of the briefing hut, Reeves addressed a room full of young gunners. Boys barely 20, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. He spoke without ceremony. "You've heard the name Arthur Weller," he began. "You've heard what he did. I'm not here to tell you stories. I'm here to teach you how he did it, and how it might save your lives." He placed a machine gun belt on the table. "When your guns jam, you panic. You freeze. That's death. Weller didn't freeze. He cut, fed, and fired, all in motion. You'll learn to do the same." Some of the recruits exchanged uneasy glances. One raised his hand. "Sir, isn't that too dangerous?" Reeves looked at him, eyes steady. "Everything up there is dangerous. But dying because you didn't try, that's worse." Over the next week, a new kind of training began. They called it the twist. Every gunner practiced slicing a jammed belt, reloading mid-spin, and firing blind at moving targets. It was brutal, exhausting, and terrifying. Many cursed the man who'd invented it. But every one of them knew, if it worked once, it could work again. News of the method spread fast. From the training fields of Yorkshire to the bases at Norfolk, every squadron started drilling the Weller Twist. Soon, it wasn't just a maneuver, it was a mindset. Relentless. Precise. Unyielding. By May, it would face its first true test. On the night of May 23rd, a formation of 70 Lancasters set out for Dortmund once again, the same route that had claimed the Night Reaper. Among them was the Halcyon Dawn, crewed by veterans who had survived Essen, Bremen, and Hamburg. At its tail sat a young gunner named Peter Nash. He had been trained under Reeves himself. As the Halcyon Dawn crossed the Rhine, flak filled the sky like black blossoms. Then came the inevitable, the fighters. Messerschmitts, streaking through the clouds, guns flashing. The bomber shook violently as cannon shells tore into its wings. Nash called over the intercom. Bandits closing. Rear and high. He swung his turret, firing short controlled bursts, trying to keep his tracer line tight. Then, the nightmare. The gun jammed. He yanked the charging handle. Nothing. The belt was twisted, chewed by shrapnel. The Messerschmitt dived again, lining up for the kill. Nash had seconds. His hands shook. Then, through the fear, he remembered Reeves' words. Don't freeze. He drew his knife, sliced the jammed belt, and fed a new one straight in, the Weller Twist. The guns roared back to life. Tracers cut through the night, striking the Messerschmitt's wing route. The enemy fighter broke apart midair, vanishing into fire. Rear clear! Nash shouted, heart pounding. The pilot laughed through the static. Remind me to buy that Weller fellow a drink. By dawn, half the formation returned, bruised but alive. And every surviving gunner spoke of one thing: how the Weller Twist had saved them. Soon after, Bomber Command issued a memo, dry, official, but historic. All turret gunners are to receive instruction in the Weller Rapid Reload procedure, effective immediately. No one knew his first name. No photograph existed. Only fragments of his wreck and a story passed from mouth to mouth. Yet by summer 1943, his method had become doctrine, a ghost's invention shaping the outcome of a war. At Lakenheath, Sergeant Reeves sat alone one evening, reading a letter addressed to him from one of Weller's surviving crewmates. He never said much. Never smiled much either. But when the shooting started, there wasn't a steadier man alive. He wasn't fighting for medals or glory. Just for the man sitting next to him. Reeves folded the letter carefully, staring out at the airfield bathed in red dusk. The bombers stood ready again, their silhouettes stretching long across the tarmac. Another night, another mission. Somewhere above, Weller's name drifted like smoke. War rolled on. Cities burned, borders shifted, and heroes vanished into the noise of history. But the ripple of one man's stubborn courage continued, passed through every turret, every trembling hand holding a trigger in the dark. In later years, after victory was declared and the world began to rebuild, the training manuals still carried his name. Weller Reload Technique, 1943. Few remembered where it came from. Fewer still knew he died alone in a burning sky. But those who did never forgot the meaning behind it, not just a way to fire faster, but a reminder of what survival demanded: defiance, even when death was certain. In 1951, during an inspection at the RAF Museum, an old mechanic uncovered a small crate marked Recovered Parts, 1943. Inside lay a single melted gun barrel, fused together at the muzzle. Attached to it was a tag, faded and torn: Tail Gunner, Night Reaper. He lifted it carefully, brushing away the dust. The weight was heavy, not just of metal, but of memory. Outside, through the hangar doors, sunlight poured across the floor. The mechanic whispered quietly, as if afraid to disturb the silence. "Still warm, isn't it?" He smiled faintly, then set it back down, letting history rest. The war had ended years ago, but the echoes remained. In every training video, in every simulator, the Weller Twist lived on, a ritual of precision and defiance. And somewhere beyond time, in the roaring dark above Europe, the unknown gunner still fired, unbroken. Because for Arthur Weller, the fight had never been about victory. It had been about refusing to stop, no matter the odds, no matter the fire. And that, in the end, was his victory.